last year, The Guardian put out an article in which it said there have been findings that 6,750 South Asian migrants have died since Qatar was awarded the right to host the World Cup in 2010. That makes an average of 12 migrant workers from South Asia have died each week since then. Data from India, Bangladesh, Nepal and Sri Lanka revealed there were nearly 6,000 deaths of migrant workers between 2011 and 2020. Separately, data from Pakistan reported a further 824 deaths around this time. The total death toll is likely to be significantly higher, as these figures don't include the deaths from a number of countries that also send large numbers of workers to Qatar, including the Philippines and Kenya. And it's worthwhile noting as well that Qatar's population, I believe, is around 3 million, and I think the majority of that population is made up of migrants.
Being a Bangladeshi, and obviously like a lot of, I try to be politically switched on, and a lot of the academic work that I do is on like Bangladeshi politics and history and all of that, and a lot of that surrounds the fact that Bangladesh makes up one of the world's largest migrant labour forces, right? Like you go anywhere in the country from, you know, Qatar to Italy, like the vast kind of majority of Bangladeshis in those countries are part of a informal labour force. We use the word informal when we talk about these migrant workers because they are not bound by kind of labour rights, work rights, any kind of workplace unions or anything like that. It's kind of, you just go informal labour and the employer gets to do whatever they want to do to you, and you don't have much legal scaffolding to kind of protect you in the workplace. That's what we mean when we talk about the informal labour force. And I've always been hyper aware because like before Qatar, it was kind of Dubai. So Dubai was the big place that, you know, a lot of these countries in the Middle East, they are built because it was essentially desert land, right? So just to give you a little bit of background for those of you who don't know much about the kind of those countries in the Gulf countries in the Middle East, they were essentially kind of like desert land. And in the last like maybe 2-3 decades, it's been literal rapid, like neck-breaking development. And the way that the countries have facilitated that, because their native population isn't that large. Like if you go to somewhere like the UAE, the percentage of Emiratis is like disproportionately low compared to, you know, migrant workers, same as in Qatar. So obviously they didn't have a native population large enough to kind of facilitate this rate of development. And essentially what they ended up doing was inviting in migrant workers from, you know, the global south, poorer countries who were looking for opportunities, and, you know, went to, you know, Dubai and now in Qatar and other places like Kuwait and Bahrain and all of these places. And then obviously, because like I said, that it's informal workers, these bosses, these capitalist bosses realize, okay, we don't need to give them much right, we don't need to give them much pay. They get there and there's like a record number of cases where it's been reported and proven that, you know, these migrant workers are severely mistreated. It's literally slave labor, as in like backbreaking work from morning till night. They get their passports taken away from them, so they can't even leave if they wanted to leave. Absolutely rife racism. There's really a conversation to be had about the Arab brand of racism here, you know, and I talk, you know, from a political point of view, but also through lived experiences. It's rife. Generally, it's very, very rife, especially towards like South Asians and Africans. It's terrible. So these people are going and they're helping to build up these countries, and it's been like that for a really, really long time. But I don't want anyone to make to ever confuse or mistaken the fact that most of these countries have been built off of the back of slave labor. And we've got a statistic now that relates specifically to the World Cup, where it was it last year, you said the statistic was from, so obviously it's much greater now, but the statistics that we had was 6,500 migrant workers that have died building the World Cup stadiums. And in that regard, it's horrendous. It's absolutely like there's nothing that you and I can sit here and say that's going to be enlightening to anybody. That's going to be revolutionary. It's a basic human principle that it's horrendous what the way that you know the labor force works in these countries.
There's no way of debating that this is wrong. People have not been given adequate rights when they've been building this stadium, these stadiums which are now hosting the World Cup. They've died in the process.
Bearing in mind as well, like, the World Cup is one of the most lucrative global events, if not probably the most, like the Olympics and the World Cup. Honestly, one of the most lucrative world events in history ever, globally, right? So Qatar will be earning God knows how much Qatar is earning, will be benefiting, how much the Qatari economy will be benefiting from hosting the World Cup. And these people are being paid pennies, pittance. And in a lot of cases, as I said, they don't even get paid that much, at all, because they get their passports taken off and then they're forced to work because they can't escape.
The other side of things as well, the main point which people have been making about why they're not happy that the World Cup is taking place here has been to do with LGBTQ plus rights. Basically, as of a law passed in 2004, same-sex sexual activity is prohibited in Qatar, with a maximum penalty of 7 years imprisonment. However, as Qatar operates an interpretation of Sharia law, which criminalizes sexual activity between men, it's possible that the death penalty can be imposed. Obviously, for multiple reasons, we're unsure as to how often this is happening, and also people that may have been threatened with it are scared to actually reach out, that sort of thing. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, regardless of your opinions, your lifestyle, religion, whatever, these people dying is wrong. You can't deny that.
No one deserves to die for what their sexual orientation is that they didn't even get to choose, right?
Sure.
Like, just for being born the way that they are.
Yeah.
No one deserves to die for that. And this is a very like techie situation, right? And not just this, but like, I'm gonna kind of now extrapolate and kind of go into the actual crux of everything in a minute. But first and foremost, like, in this situation, it's kind of really hard to know where to like navigate and how to maneuver this, because obviously on the one hand you want to condemn like homophobia, but then on the other hand, a lot of the condemnation from the West comes with Islamophobia as well, right?
Exactly.
My solidarity is first and foremost with the Qatari LGBTQ community, like the actual people that are living in Qatar who are LGBTQ, because they're really the people because obviously it's terrible. I understand, like, for any queer person, like, it's not nice to have to think like, okay, I might not be able to go and enjoy this event simply because of my sexual orientation, but ultimately at least they have a choice, right? Whereas, like I said, for me, what's more concerning is the actual people that live there and can't necessarily escape, or it's not as easy as deciding to or not to go there on holiday, right?
Yeah. And from that perspective, it's actually, I would go as far as to say, maybe slightly selfish if there are people out there that are only raising their concerns about this because it affects them, as opposed to, if the World Cup was not taking place in Qatar, would they still be shedding light on this issue for the people that, like, say, they live in Qatar, that are maybe imprisoned or even having the death penalty imposed on them purely because of their sexuality? Are these people raising their voice in regards to that? And if they're not, then it then becomes a question of, well, again, like you said, it's possibly thinly veiled Islamophobia that is happening here. That's
kind of what's been my contentious with this entire dialogue, like, and not just this dialogue, but as a Muslim person speaking out against anything bad about kind of the Muslim community and the way the Muslim community does things, because there are so many, obviously, like, with any demographic of people, like, we make up a massive, over 1 billion Muslims in the world, right? Like, how much is it? Is it 2 billion now? I don't know. It's a big bear of us, right? So naturally, there's problems, there's issues in the community, and sometimes it's really hard to kind of speak out about these things because you're aware of the Western gaze on those topics, right? Like, for example, one big thing, you know, that's really rife within like the Muslim male community is like misogyny. And I often find it really hard to come forward and talk about misogyny honestly and earnestly as a Muslim woman who has a right to talk about it, who is in the community, because outsiders, you know, non-Muslims, specifically Westerners, will then kind of use that as some twisted testimony of the fact that Islam is barbaric and Muslims are barbaric, you know? So it's kind of hard to have conversations that need to be had, for example, as I said, about misogyny, about workers' rights, about LGBTQ rights, without having those conversations co-opted and exploited by non-Muslims who are simply Islamophobic. That's kind of what the difficulty has been for me. And it's also hard to kind of like zone out and hone in on instead what matters. And that's why I started off by saying my number one solidarity is with the Qatari, you know, LGBTQ community, because they're the people who matter here. They're the people who are actually whose lives are at risk, right? But it's kind of, and there's absolutely a valid conversation, and those concerns are absolutely valid, but then it kind of makes it difficult, and a Muslim maybe gets my back up a little bit, maybe gets me a little bit defensive when now all of a sudden everyone is a human rights advocate. Yeah. And it's kind of like, it's really funny because I see it time and time again with the Iran protests, you know, when it's Islam in a bad light, right? When it's Muslims doing barbaric things in you know, LGBTQ rights in Qatar, or women's rights in Iran, then it's all of a sudden everyone is a human rights activist. Then all of a sudden everyone is advocating for human rights. But then when we're talking about mass Islamophobia, when we're talking about, you know, literally France banning the hijab, then no one's worried about human rights.
Yeah, I think this ties into where we're at now then, where obviously the World Cup is happening, like it's going on, but obviously you can be unhappy with the way things are, but obviously, and again, there's been loads of conversation about like whether it should be taking place, like what's like boycotting it, etc., which I think should be up to
Qatar should never have gotten, and this is another thing, right? This is actually what I wanted to say, right? It's very easy to sit here and say Qatar should never have gotten the World Cup bid. And yeah, fair enough, they shouldn't have. But then who can get the World Cup bid?
Exactly. Right? Yeah.
Remember there was an episode we did one time where we spoke about moving to the UAE, and we had this whole debate of, okay, but they notoriously have very, you know, bad human rights. And that's the kind of, a lot of people jump on this moral high horse, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, cool. We live in literally the imperial heart. You know, we literally live in the heart of empire. So what makes, because don't get it wrong, like, I saw a gay person talk about this, a gay man. He came forward and he had this like Twitter thread talking about this controversy, and he was like, absolutely, like it's terrible out there, but also there's actual like material homophobic legislation in somewhere like California. Yeah. You know, literally, what was it, last week or the week before, there was a shooting in a gay bar, like a mass shooting in a gay bar.
Yeah,
and it's mad as well.
On Transgender Day of Remembrance as well. So
right, on the Trans Day of Remembrance, there was a mass shooting in a gay bar. Obviously, RIP to like everyone who tragically lost their lives in that. And what's mental, you know, one thing that shook me, that one thing that genuinely rattled me was that in the aftermath of it, they were interviewing the shooter's father. And the father, when I read the quote, I thought it was like not real. And then I saw the interview. The dad literally comes forward and he says, oh yeah, you know, when they told me it was in a gay bar, the first thing I thought was, oh my God, is he gay? Is he gay? And then I realized, oh, he's not gay. Oh, okay, all right then. Yeah. Like, you're hearing the son has just gone and murdered, like, I don't know what the death toll was, but innocent people have been literally murdered by your son, and your first thought was, oh my God, no, is he gay? All right. So like in the same, in literally the week after, there's been a mass shooting in a gay bar in America. People seem to have certain vim for somewhere like Qatar. You know, so the point is that these human rights abuses that you point to, they exist everywhere. Literally, they exist everywhere.
Yeah. As a closing thing, I think this is the problem with the opening speech that what's his name, Giovanni gave, the head of FIFA, I think he is, at the start of the tournament, where he very rightly said that the global West should be focusing on its past atrocities and making reparations for them, which is very true. But my problem with his speech was that he was making out that it has to be an either or. He was like, focus on that rather than this. But I'm like, well, no, why can't we do both? Like,
that's it, and I think that's the only stance really that should be taken, is that it's absolutely valid, these criticisms of Qatar, absolutely, but check your Islamophobia and hold your own governments to account in the exact same way if you're really about it.